千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I want to extend my welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we are ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. First, as usual, let's take a look at the chapter title. Hold and Overfill. The title of this chapter refers to the primary metaphor used by Lao Tzu, which is a cup that can be filled with tea or water, but can also be overflowing. That is, it can be spilling the tea or water everywhere. The purpose of this metaphor is to talk about the mind that is filled with knowledge, ideas, and wisdom, and not be overflowing with self-importance or egocentric conceits. In life, we come across people who are wise. We also come across people who we know are egotistical. So they represent a cup that is filled with wisdom and a cup that's overflowing with egocentric arrogance. So following the concepts from previous chapters, Lao Tzu wants us to emulate water, to utilize the yin principle and approach life with a kind of graceful humility, to be helpful to others without needing any praise or ego gratification. So this chapter is going to be the continuation of that train of thought. So let me show everyone what the chapter looks like. So here we have 11 lines. Tao Te Ching, chapter 9. Holding a cup and overfilling it cannot be as good as stopping short. Pounding a blade and sharpening it cannot be kept for long. Gold and jade fill up the room. No one is able to protect them. Wealth and position bring arrogance and leave disasters upon oneself. When achievement is completed, fame is attained, withdraw oneself. This is the Tao of heaven. So there we have the chapter. How can we divide it up? As I mentioned previously, not all Tao Te Ching chapters can be divided into 3 sections, the beginning, the middle, and the end. This particular one can be divided into 2 sections. Now this particular chapter can be a little bit tricky because there just aren't many characters that repeat themselves from line to line. If we scan through, we can find this set of interesting corresponding characters. And let me also note that we have 2 other repetitions there from line 1 to line 3. So This is the glimpse of a poetic construction where you have 3 sets of 2 lines each. Now, of course, the first character of line 6 looks different from the first character of line 4 or line 2. So it would be more obvious as a poetic construction if it was the same character. This is where a bit of knowledge in Chinese comes in handy. The first character of line 2 and the first character of line 4 being the same character, those characters mean not or no. It's the negation character. And if you look at the translation to the right of it, the first word of those lines, cannot. So that denotes the negation. It is the character for no. Then the first character in the last line of this set, line 6, the first character of line 6 is also a negation character. It is also no, but it's a different character for that. Just like in English, we have many synonyms that mean the same thing or are very close in meaning. So here, that character there at the beginning of line 6, it actually serves the same function, negation, as line 4 and line 2, the first characters. So that's why it qualifies as a repeating character, even though it looks different. So in the first section, like I said, there are 3 sets of 2 lines each, and these are the 3 primary metaphors used by Lao Tzu to illustrate his point here. And in the second section, it's basically about his conclusion, deriving from the metaphors and talking about what we can learn from the metaphors. And the last part is all about his advice to how you and I should live. The very last part of it has particular importance in the Tao Te Ching because that's where Lao Tzu says the Tao of heaven. How do we follow that? How do we practice the Tao of heaven in life? Well, we do so, and this we'll dig into in great detail. We will be taking action and then, just like water, flow to the lowest point. Let's go ahead and start our line-by-line discussion for this chapter. Line 1, holding a cup and overfilling it. Let's go ahead and break down the 4 characters here. The first character, that is the character for hold, a verb. Then we have the second character there, and third character, overfill, and the last character is it. So this does not specifically say that it is a cup or a vessel for holding anything. The container is implied. It is not explicitly stated. So fortunately, with all the commentary that we have in all the generations after the first initial writing of the Tao Te Ching, we know that it's really talking about something like a cup holding water or tea. But it is not explicitly stated because Lao Tzu meant for the metaphor to be generalized for multiple layers of meaning. It could be anything, not just a cup. As an example, it can represent the mind. If the cup is the mind, then the tea in the cup can be preconceived notions. And we know that when the mind is overfilled in this way, then there's no room for anything else. There's no way to have additional knowledge, a different way of looking at things, different method of doing things. A mind that is filled up like that becomes closed-mindedness. Line 2, cannot be as good as stopping short. This starts with the two characters that are still often used in Mandarin today, 不如. So the first character is no, and the second character is compare. So this is when you say something cannot compare to something else, meaning it is not as good as something else. And there we are, 不如. And to overfill anything, this is basically Lao Tzu saying, to overfill cannot compare to stopping short of being full. It is not as good as stopping short. We know this from experience because if you fill out a cup too much, you get all kinds of messy results. You get the liquid coming out and ending up on the table. We don't want that. Now, this is a way to say it is good. It's a good thing to receive tea representing knowledge, but too much of anything is a bad idea. And we should always stop short of too much, stop short of saturation. That's how we can remain open to new information. And I find that this is especially relevant to us in this day and age. And this is because, as you and I know, we are facing so many changes in our world, rapid changes. If we're not open to new information, it is to our own disadvantage. So there is special importance that is relevant in our world today. Now, this whole idea to stop short of total 100% fullness, this is actually an important concept in the Tao. It just hasn't been described that way. It's not usually talked about as an important concept in the Tao. It is knowing when to stop. It's usually never touched on when people discuss the Tao, whether East or West. I think those of you that have been doing some research, doing your own reading on the Tao, you see how people will often talk about Wu Wei, unattached actions, or Pu, the principle of simplicity. But they never mention the importance of knowing when to stop. And I would say it is actually one of the more important concepts in Tao philosophy. How do we know that? Well, we can tell it's important because it appears multiple times in the Tao Te Ching. Whenever anything gets repeated by Lao Tzu, we pay special attention. And perhaps it doesn't get a lot of attention because knowing when to stop is never pointed out specifically. It's never associated with a particular name. And the same idea, the same concept is expressed in two different ways, as I will show you in the iterations of the concept. So the chapter that we're on right now is the very first instance of the iteration. It is repeated 3 other times. 4 other times because it appears twice in a particular chapter. But let me show you. In one of the chapters to come, Tao Te Ching, chapter 30, Line 8 and 9, here's what it says. Good commander achieves results, then stops, and does not dare to reach for domination. So the two characters that you see there, especially the last one, E, it is the same character that is being used in the current chapter to talk about stopping. This is the idea applied to the military. It is the same as saying that if you fill a cup to the brim, that is you accomplishing an objective, but then you should go no further. In the military context, it just means that domination, subjugation of the conquered side would be like having tea overflow and spill out onto the table. It would be too much. So this is definitely another repeat or iteration of the same idea. And then we look a little bit further. We go into chapter 32 of the Tao Te Ching, and here's what we see. One should know when to stop. Knowing when to stop, thus avoiding danger. This is where it is explicitly stated, and it is using the same idea from this chapter, but using different characters. As you can see on the left-hand side, the characters are the same within 32, but look different than the ones in 30. 知止, know, stop, knowing when to stop. So looking even further, we go to chapter 44, the final iteration of the concept. It is also a very explicit expression. It says, knowing contentment avoids disgrace. Knowing when to stop avoids danger. So notice that it's very similar as 32 about stopping in time to avoid too much, the danger of too much, represented by the subjugation of the enemy in the military complex, in a military context, or the spilling of water or tea in the cup context. So this brings me to the classical story told in Eastern traditions to illustrate this concept. It is a classic that has been told and retold many times, and I want to present it to you as being a very fitting story to be inserted here to illuminate what we're talking about. The name of the story is Pouring Tea. And here is how it goes. Once upon a time, in ancient China, there was a student of the Tao who visited with the sage. So the student said to the sage, Master, I am here to learn from you. There are areas of the Tao I do not fully understand. So of course, as you would expect, the sage said he would be more than glad to help. So the two of them sat down over tea to talk. Initially, the sage assumed the student had questions he wished to ask. After all, he said that there were areas of the Tao that he did not fully comprehend. But it soon became apparent that the student was only there to express his views. That is all he did. He expounded on his opinions, covering several topics. And there seemed to be no end to his discourse. So to the sage, the situation started to feel much more like a lecture than a conversation. So the sage said nothing, but he lifted the teapot to serve tea for his guest. He poured hot tea into the student's cup. When it was full, he kept pouring. So the tea overflowed the cup onto the table. Some of it splashed onto the student, who was startled. He jumped back out of his seat and said, Master, master, please stop pouring. The tea is spilling over. The sage said, yes. The teacup is full, so it cannot take any more tea. This is not unlike your mind. It is already full of your opinions. If you do not empty your cup first, how can it receive more tea? The end. Let's talk about the Tao of this story. So first, the sage is absolutely correct. If one's mind is already full of pre-existing notions, how can it learn anything new? If it's already full of hubris, how can it transcend its limitations? We see this around us with all the people that we know are egocentric in our lives. Their minds are already full of hubris. Therefore, it is basically impossible for them to transcend their current limitations. They cut off the possibility of improvement for themselves. And by the same token, if your mind is full of worries and anxieties, how can you face life with good cheer? If it is full of attachments to the past, how can you create a better future for yourself? And to continue, let's talk about the story specifically, how we can link the metaphors to life. So first of all, the cup receiving tea is the mind learning, receiving new concepts, information, facts, knowledge, and so on. So let me ask everyone, what would it mean to sip from this cup? In the metaphor of Lao Tzu, to sip from the cup is to apply what you have learned, thereby turning it into experience. So think about what's going on when you have a teacup and there's fragrant hot tea being poured into it. If you then start to enjoy the tea, you are experiencing the tea for yourself, not just looking at it. This is equivalent to you learning about something new, like an idea, maybe a Tao principle. That's like receiving the tea into the cup. When you actually sip from it, you are utilizing that principle in your life and seeing, experiencing how it actually works. So let's look at the opposite. What if you don't? If you don't take any tea, you just let the cup sit there, well, you know the hot tea is going to go cold. It's going to become stale. It is no longer the fragrant hot tea that it was in the beginning, given sufficient time, if you don't do anything with it. This is exactly equivalent to somebody learning book knowledge, but then do nothing with it, not actually put it into practice. The book knowledge has a tendency to become increasingly outdated as time goes on. Now, I'm glad to say that the principles of the Tao explained by Lao Tzu It seems to be fresh because it is timeless. But at the same time, I also know that the knowledge I see in so many other books will become dated after a year or two, especially in the technology field. And that is basically tea that grows cold very quickly. Before I leave this slide, let me say application is crucial in the authentic Tao. And you may find that it's interesting I need to mention this specifically, but in the West, there are students of the Tao who reject this very notion. They're the ones that approach the Tao from an academic perspective or a purely philosophical mindset. This means they're often trapped in the idea that they only have to think about certain things, like Tao principles. And Tao sages already know just thinking and only thinking will produce no results in the material world. It's just something that happens in your mind, and it's isolated there. So the academic and philosophically oriented people will gravitate to the notion in the Tao that you can do nothing and do everything. Basically, they take a passage in the Tao Te Ching out of context. They magnify it to cover everything. And then they use it as the catch-all excuse for inaction, for passivity. Oh, I don't have to do anything because I can do everything. And nothing happens. This is not just unique to the study of the Tao philosophy, it is part of human nature. We see the same manifestation occur in different ways, in different schools of thought about self-improvement. For instance, if all you do is think positive, but you never take any action, you can be sure the universe will respond in kind. It will reflect the non-action right back to you, which means nothing changes. Now, in Asia, students of the authentic Tao tradition are taught a very different lesson. Thinking is great, but it is only the precursor to action. This is how the authentic masters teach the original philosophy. It also happens to be the way that philosophy is taught here in martial arts dojos in the West. Whenever an authentic master teaches movement, they will also teach Tao philosophy. And when they talk about that, it is always the mindset of action and application, for the simple reason that it works. It's also the reason why people who have experienced that, when they find my books, they resonate with them. They realize that I am coming in from the same source as these masters in the martial arts dojos. So to continue on, continue with the Tao. Let's go to the overflowing cup. A cup overflowing with tea represents an arrogant mind. I think that's easy to see. So the tea spilling onto the table makes quite a mess. Just like in the story, the student jumps back out of his seat to avoid getting splashed. In a real life situation, you see the same thing. An arrogant person expressing his arrogance is like tea spilling over, splashing everybody, and people retreat. People take a step back to avoid getting that on them. So, and this is what the bullet is talking about. In life, an arrogant person tends to make a mess of various situations in any setting, so that when other people perceive the spillover of arrogance, they pull back to avoid or minimize further interactions. And of course, this does not make the arrogant person popular. So for that reason, Lao Tzu emphasizes in this chapter, holding a cup and overfilling it cannot be as good as stopping short. So now we have a different way to look at the same passage from the Tao Te Ching and have it apply to real life situations, have it apply to our interactions with other human beings that we encounter. Let's continue on. Line 3, pounding a blade and sharpening it. So let's go ahead and break it down. 4 characters as usual. The first character is to pound, like with an implement, something like a hammer, and sharpen. The second character is end. It's a connective. The third character there is to sharpen, still widely used in modern Mandarin. And then the last character there is it. So to sharpen a blade is very similar to the previous metaphor with the cup. And it doesn't say blade. It doesn't specifically have a character for knife, sword, or blade. It is also implied, just like the vessel or the cup. And this is serves the same purpose. Lao Tzu wants to generalize the metaphor to apply to many different things, especially human beings. And what we do, what happens to us in daily living. It is another angle for Lao Tzu to comment on human beings, the human condition. So we can take it in a number of different ways. So for instance, we can think about sharpening the blade as training to sharpen one's mind or reflex. And that's what we talk about. In English, we also say, if we do the mental exercises, we can sharpen the mind. If we read books, we can sharpen the mind. We absorb ideas and knowledge from reading, sharpen the mind. And physical exercises, athletic activities, we can sharpen our reflex. We have that expression in English as well. Therefore, to sharpen can apply to a human being mentally or physically. This is true in Chinese or English. But then, what about excess? What if we do it too much? Too much sharpening causes damage. This can be damage to others as well as the blade itself. That is, a blade that is too sharp can inadvertently cut yourself or other people. Metaphorically speaking, that is like when the mind has been sharpened, but it's too sharp. It becomes harsh. And you can then, with your sharp remarks, pointed remarks, sharp attacks, inadvertently hurt someone's feelings, like the blade. And the blade becoming too thin is now very easy to damage. And this is just like when you overtrain yourself physically, it can lead to injury. So the metaphor works in multiple levels. Line 4 cannot be kept for long. 4 characters. Let's break them down. First character, same character for no, the negation character. Second character there, that is a character for can. No can is cannot. And then the third character is long. And the last character is keep, to hold on to something, to keep something for long. So now you can see, you can derive the translation pretty easily just by knowing what the characters are. Cannot be kept for long, meaning the blade that is over sharpened cannot be kept for long, meaning that it will be damaged. It will chip, it will break. So the main point from this chapter, as well as previous chapters, is that something that cannot last, it must not be aligned with the Tao. The Tao is eternal. Something that is good but lasting is aligned with the Tao. It would be aligned with the Tao. It takes on the Tao characteristics of being positive, beneficial, and long-lasting. So the ancients, observing how blades work, what happens when you sharpen them too much, they knew. The ancients knew over-sharpened blades become brittle because they're so thin. The edge has become so thin, it can easily break off. Such a blade would not be a durable tool, and therefore it is not in keeping with the Tao. So we can dig into the metaphor in this fashion. We can look at the blade and we can state that the blade being sharpened represents a person undergoing mental or physical training, as we discussed. A sharper, more effective blade means sharper mind, a more effective body, like faster reflexes, sharper reflexes. And overall, when someone is in good condition, there is a sharp crispness about his actions, his words, his demeanor. Now, what happens when the sharpening is done to excess? Well, we know the sharpness of the blade is reflected in the harshness of the overly critical mind. This is the other part of it. This is when we talk about how the sharpness of the blade will inadvertently cut people, maybe by accident. It is reflected in a mind that has become much too harsh, much too critical. And there's another aspect of it, the part that is easily damaged. The brittleness of the blade is reflected in the brittleness of personality. So let me ask everyone to pay attention to this and think about life situations where you have encountered this kind of personality. The personality that is always negative and critical, that always has a cutting remark about someone or something. That person, that personality has a brittleness because that person can be easily offended. That person may get angry rather easily because of the offensive, the perceived offensive remarks or situations. And that person is not someone that others will find easy to get along with. Let's continue. So excessive sharpness represents arrogant mind as well. So the person who is overly critical, well, there's arrogance associated with that. We can see this quite easily. So this is where we connect the metaphor with the overflowing cup. The cup that overflows is overflowing with self-importance, self-important concepts. It's all about me. The overly sharpened mind, the critical person, the person who always has cutting remarks, cutting criticism for other people, that is another manifestation of arrogance. Like, I know more than you, I am better than you, that type of arrogance. The difference in this metaphor is in terms of scrutiny and criticism, because the teacup doesn't get into that. It's just talking about making a mess with the tea or water spilling over onto the desk, splashing everyone, causing people to take a step back. Here, it's going into the sharp and harsh scrutiny of everything, the sharp and harsh criticism of everything. Sharpness maps to harshness. So just as a sharp blade cuts and causes physical damage, a sharp critique can hurt someone's feelings or cause anger. It can trigger someone. That person is, none too pleased with the sharp critique and flies off the handle. So this is a link, as you can see here, linking arrogance to an unforgiving personality. So the overly sharp blade is a negative thing in the Tao. You know that naturally people wish to avoid someone like that. Someone who's always complaining, always being negative, always pointing out flaws all the time in everything. Now, we talked about how because the Tao is eternal, to be lasting is to be more in tune with the Tao. It is no accident, therefore, that the arrogant person, just like the cup that overflows or the blade that is sharpened to the point of being brittle, this arrogant person is not someone who lasts. Indeed, one can say life is lonely and miserable for such a person. People are turned off by arrogance. Community is essential for happiness and longevity. So it makes a lot of sense that we want to be humble. We ourselves feel turned off by someone else's arrogance. We do not want to be someone like that who turns everybody off, who causes everybody to take a step back, who causes damage to other people intentionally or not. Happiness for us means being part of a community. It doesn't mean we cannot criticize anybody. It just means that we have to do so in a way that is aligned with the Tao, constructively, helpfully. Now, that seems rather simple, but let me just point out there's any number of times that you and I will witness people who are expressing a criticism not to help, not to make things better, but to express their superiority. Have you seen that? I definitely have. And it is a certainty for me that I never, ever want to become like that. So we are now approaching the top of the hour. We are done talking about the metaphor for the blade that is being sharpened. This is a good point at which to pause the presentation to be resumed next time. The next metaphor that we'll talk about has to do with material things. For now, we should be moving on to the summary for today. So the advice from Lao Tzu to us takes the form of 3 metaphors, and we have covered 2 out of 3. The first one is that we want to hold the cup that is not overfilled, metaphorically speaking. We want to enjoy the tea that has been poured into it, again, metaphorically speaking. And it is important for us to enjoy the tea because it creates more of an opening, more space within the cup to receive more tea, fresh, hot tea. So metaphorically, it is clear what we have to do when it comes to learning about the Tao and applying the Tao to real life. Number 2, the metaphor that we have just talked about is to wield the knife, the blade that is not too sharp, that has not been overly sharpened to the point of brittleness. This is because we want to use the knife, which I like to remind everybody, the knife is metaphorical for the mind and the body, we want to use our physical selves, our mental aspects as a tool for the intended purpose. The knife, the blade is a tool. We want to avoid sharpening it too much, which means the mind becomes too harsh, too critical, too negative. And finally, as a preview for next time, the third metaphor that Lao Tzu will use is the room that is full of treasures. Now, of course, typically you and I will think of a room that is full of treasures as a positive thing. In Western culture, that's what we are taught, that we want to accumulate a lot of material possessions. Lao Tzu points out that anything done to excess can be a bad thing, including the accumulation of material things in this room. When you have too much, you begin to worry about some kind of loss, some kind of damage. So the point that we're going to talk about next time and emphasize is that in the Tao, one can acquire wealth without going overboard. And I want to emphasize that because there's any number of spiritual traditions that would actually highlight some sort of a very Spartan existence or poverty as a virtue. Not in the Tao. In the Tao, prosperity is a good thing. Abundance is a good thing. It is to be enjoyed. Life is to be enjoyed. But everything in moderation, we don't want to do any of that in excess. It just makes sense. And then finally, the last bullet there, we want to liberate ourselves from the worry of having too much. And that's because when we possess excessive material things, that is always one of the prices that we must pay. That we become ever more concerned about the possibility of loss. Therefore, we take measures to protect it, and we still have increasing anxiety about losing any or part of it. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.